Everyone hear me out. I'm not crazy. I have no mental disorders that would predispose me to any type of psychosis. I'm not a drug addict or anything of that sort. If I were, or had ever been any of those, I'd never have even made it halfway to the position on which I now hold. But as I cower in this corner, as I write what will most certainly be my last words, as the product of humanity's foolish attempt to peer into the unknown grow ever closer to me, I can now only wish I had done the right thing from the start. It doesn't matter who I am or how I got involved. The least I can do now is warn you all of what is to come. Please, listen to what I tell you. What happened here was real. What I and my colleagues experienced here was real. If anything, the only insane thing is that I somehow managed to survive the outcome of such that I can be able to share it with the rest of the world. Many of you will call me a liar. Many of you will call me a crazy conspiracy theorist. Many of you will assume that I clearly have lost all touch with reality, or that I'm just fishing for attention and exposure by telling some convoluted, overpuffed campfire story. Be a skeptic if you want. At this point, I really don't give a shit. Believe what you want. Call me insane. Quit reading altogether if you're just that certain of your opinion. But I hope to God, at least some of you will be smarter than that, and will value your lives enough to heed this warning. There is a reason the government hides certain things. There is a reason that the common people of society are not kept privy to the doings of the so-called secret organizations and nondescript or unofficial existent factions of the government. If you know as much as I did, hell, even half of it, you'd probably have offed yourself by now. But assuming you're tougher than the average Jane or Joe off the street and are actually mentally and emotionally numb enough to be unknowingly bought so incomprehensibly cheap, such to even be part of any of these aforementioned groups, then you know just how much trouble is coming. By now, almost anyone involved who is still alive certainly will understand my resolve. As of this moment, I'm not even sure if the President or Pentagon have even been informed. I do not regret my life's work. I don't regret the things I've done or the tireless work I have done here for over a decade. But I wholeheartedly lament that I could be bought well enough to be so foolish and sheepish as to accept it was all for the greater good. I'll admit I reached the point where I turned a blind eye for the sake of a paycheck. But now I wish I could go back and follow my gut from the get-go. But that's beside the point now. Even as you read this, I'm already dead. I just know it. But if no one else involved who's breathing has a fucking spine in this godforsaken hellhole that I've been stupid enough to bring upon ourselves, then I'll gladly be the one to blow the whistle. It's time the world knew what really happens in the places the average person only hears social distorted rumors about. This that I will come clean about is what we've really done. And this is what will soon be the death of us. Our actions cannot be undone now. It may even be too late for the rest of you. For what it's worth, I'm so sorry. In March of 2007, a multi-billion-dollar experiment was set in motion for the purpose of discovering proof that parallel realities existed. The US even created a new highly specialized and top-secret organization of the government called Nexus, the Neurological and Extraterrestrial Experiment Undercover Sector, to undertake this and all other similar subsequent experiments that might be proposed in the future. Through science, quantum theory has been proven undisputably correct for decades by this point. We had all of the evidence. We had all of the proof. What we did not have was concrete documentation of what exactly exists amidst these ambiguous planes of existence. After nearly a decade of intense research and discovery of the quantum world, the most technologically advanced equipment known to man and the brightest minds of our generation, we had finally developed a plan to try and document what lies amidst the unknown. We decided to, in a sense, attempt to open a quantum wormhole for the purpose of allowing highly trained scientists to observe and document their findings, such that we could better understand how these strange, interdimensional pathways could be utilized to make space travel more efficient. Doing so, as you could imagine, would be incredibly difficult and highly dangerous. The technology at the time, even though it was at least 10 years ahead of what is commonly available in present day, was by no means enough to latch onto, open, and stabilize one of these pathways enough to allow an entire person to pass through safely. And, even if it were, it would obviously be far too risky of an undertaking. But after years of trials, researchers did manage to lock onto one and were able to keep its mouth open and stable for about 5 minutes. However, they only had enough negative energy in the graviton generators to enlarge it to 1/3 the size of the head of a sewing needle. Even creating this event took more than 4 months of around-the-clock supercomputing and data analytics. And the graviton generators and core reactors had already been charging for 2 months prior. So, the decision was made to send binary data as opposed to physical matter, as it would be far easier and put much less stress on the reactors and graviton generators to transmit digital code through a wormhole of such a small size. It was eventually determined that we would simply hook up EKG monitors and brainwave transmitters to a selected group of 4 scientists for the purpose of sending digitalized, sympathetic strings of information into one of these pathways in order to hopefully receive some kind of answers via brainwave responses of the scientists in question, essentially making them a biological conduit of sorts for the data to travel and to be interpreted by the computers. The window of connection was still no more than 5 minutes, so quite a bit of time was spent determining exactly what information would be exchanged. Our organization's stuffed suits spent nearly the entire time it took to subsequently charge the generators and prime the sequencers to settle on this information. Finally, on October 5th, 2018, the official experiment, dubbed Project Wisteria, was sanctioned and set in motion. The scientists chosen were among the most elite in our group. Doctors Adam McCannis, Lisa Smith, Gregor Schwarzkopf, and Sylvia Cruz were selected for the undertaking. They were put through weeks of psychiatric evaluation prior to the initiation of the experiment, such as to ensure that they would not interfere with the data collected via their synaptic networks. They were put through elaborate subconscious sleep training, such that would allow them to cleanly interpret the binary data that entered their brains via MRI and synaptic pulse response, or SPRs, whilst in the medically induced comatose state, and process received sensory responses of images, colors, and other sensory data accurately. The interpreted data would then pass into a brain-machine interface as binary data that the computers could instantly decode as text. The result was a calculably accurate enough response such that we could determine them as the most mentally and reliable stable human interfaces. As the time until the experiment was set to begin drew ever closer, Doctors McCannis and Cruz had begun to grow nervous and started to feel uncomfortable about agreeing to be involved. They knew it was too late to back out, as they had already signed troves of legal paperwork and were practically bound their souls to the project and powers at play. They, as well as 2 others, were also promised a quite substantial tax-free lump sum payment upon the completion of the experiment, and the dollar figure alone was almost enough to make them wonder if they had made the right decision. They talked to the other 2 doctors to see if they felt similar levels of anxiety about it, but they were told they didn't and were just excited to be part of such a potentially groundbreaking scientific breakthrough, and that the obscene paycheck alone would more than warrant whatever they might encounter or be subject to. Defeated, McCannis and Cruz decided that their concerns were nothing more than anxiety resulting from the scope of the experiment, and decided not to speak about it further, though they continued to remain silently indifferent up until the morning of May 2nd, 2018, the official day of immersion. And so begins the description of what few consolidated written records from a couple of scientists whom cataloged the event that I managed to get my hands on before. The fallout. The alarms and screams are beginning to become deafening now. I'll try and recollect them while I still have time. I hope to God I can make it through. Day 1. Time, 7:19 a.m. Data log 1. The 4 volunteers have been connected to the machines. The brain-machine interfaces are now online. The gravitation generators and reactors have been charged for 7 months. The stored power in both reactor cores have been measured to be equal to nearly 30% of the average consumption of the entire U.S. electrical grid for a given time. We believe it will take nearly every ounce of this energy to carry out and complete the immersion. 2 of the scientists, Doctors McCannis and Cruz, have seemed a bit on edge this morning. We have chalked this up to pre-test anxiety. Their last set of SPRs were as clean as ever, so we do not believe this will be a problem. The first immersion of Project Wisteria will begin at exactly 7:30 a.m. All staff are now standing by. Day 1. Time, 7:30 a.m. Data log 2. The immersion is underway, and so far the experiment seems to be proceeding as anticipated. The decoded SPR feedback data suggests that there may in fact be proof of an intelligent design similar to our own reality beyond the fringes of the wormhole. Only Dr. Schwarzkopf seems to have broken through the threshold at this point. Only his SPRs are currently providing feedback. Based on the incoming data, it seems as though the other scientists are having difficulty breaking through. At 40 seconds into the immersion, Dr. Schwarzkopf's vital signs seem to be rising far above expected levels. His SPR feedback readouts are beginning to become less interpretable, and his real-time biological vital sign readouts are beginning to cause great concern. It seems now as if he is on the verge of cardiac arrest. This could highly compromise the integrity of the experiment. Medics are now standing by, but have been explicably instructed to ignore any and all dangerous biological and neural feedback unless they reach unmistakably critical levels. Day 1. Time, 7:32 a.m. Data log 3. Dr. Smith's tether to the wormhole is beginning to deteriorate, similar to that of Dr. Schwarzkopf's. Dr. Schwarzkopf's is now on the verge of cardiac arrest. His vitals are far beyond established safety protocols. His SPRs are becoming indecipherable and are beginning to decode into a currently unknown language. The senior scientists are attempting to make sense of it. Medics are still being instructed to stand down from coming to the aid of Dr. Smith. It seems as if she has finally broken the fringe of the wormhole, as her vital signs have begun to skyrocket into near-stroke territory. Her SPRs are becoming increasingly uninterpretable, and her eyes appear to be stuck wide open. The pupils have begun to widen further and further, and now have seemed to swallow her entire eye socket. She remains entirely motionless, though her vitals are now beginning to become so high, our basic instruments can only barely measure them. Dr. Schwarzkopf seems to have no measurable brain activity, despite his vitals peaking well beyond the level that a normal human could handle. The senior scientists are now beginning to seriously fear for their colleagues, as well as their own lives. Our superiors remain eerily uninterested. Day 1. Time: 7:34 a.m. Data log 5. Dr. Schwarzkopf is no longer breathing. The team of medics are still under strict orders not to intervene. They are all beginning to raise their voices at the scientists in charge of the immersion. Dr. Smith is now approaching cardiac arrest herself, and her pupils have gone now entirely black. Her SPRs are beginning to become entirely unintelligible, as the MRI data from the other two scientists suggests they are now beginning to pass the threshold of the wormhole. Dr. Schwarzkopf and Smith are now in critical danger. They are beginning to try and break through their restraints. The senior experimenters have ordered us to restrain the doctors, but not to disrupt them heavily, as their tethers are still being monitored. One of the scientists who has been in close proximity to Dr. Smith are now experiencing nausea and dissociative blackouts. No one can seem to make sense of this behavior. All 4 scientists are now experiencing radical increases in brain waves and biological activity far beyond what was foreseen for this immersion. It is now being deemed that the experiment be aborted and the scientists be unlinked, debriefed, and medically observed, along with the staff whom experience medical abnormalities due to the interactions with the 4 scientists. Further data entry has been prohibited until further notice. Day 1. Time: 8:15 p.m. Data log 8. The gravitation generators, reactors, and all other experimental equipment have been shut down. The wormhole is now closed, and all 4 doctors were immediately retired to isolated rooms to be thoroughly examined. Dr. Smith has fallen into a coma following an assumed period of dissociative break, suffered only moments after shutdown of the immersion. Even after being fully disconnected from the machines, and in her now comatose state, her brain activity continues to skyrocket according to the MRI. The condition of the scientists whom fell inexplicably ill while in her presence during the immersion are continuing to decline. Dr. Schwarzkopf has been pronounced dead as of 7:50 p.m. His vitals are flatlined, and he has no brain activity. Both doctors, McCannis and Cruz, were determined to have no adverse reactions immediately following the abortion of the experiment, and their post-examinations seemed normal. However, over the past few hours, Dr. Cruz is now believed to be suffering from hallucinations. She has been given appropriate medication via IV that should help subdue them. Dr. McCannis appears to be fairly normal as of now, though he seems unsuspectingly silent and withdrawn. He is still being confined to a secured and fully isolated room for the sake of his safety, as well as pre-protocol following the experiment. 2 of the security staff members whom were stationed on the other side of the complex swear up and down that they saw him earlier in the afternoon. This is not possible, given the level of his confinement. However, their statements were still taken and filed. One of the two security workers is now reporting severe nausea and vertigo. Day 2. Time, 7:34 a.m. Data log 11. It has now been exactly 24 hours since the immersion. Dr. Smith came out of her coma around 4 a.m. this morning. Immediately following her regaining consciousness, she began to speak a certain phrase that we believed to be gibberish. Her vitals and brain activity were still through the roof. In order to protect her from heavy brain damage, she was medically induced back into a comatose state, though her sedation is much heavier now. After deciphering the phrase she was speaking, it was determined to be, "Creation is a lie. Your God bows to us," spoken in reverse. Both security guards that believe they saw Dr. McCannis the night previous are now violently ill. Both are experiencing high fever, nausea, and seizures. The seizures became so violent that they too were medically induced into a coma to stop them. They are now being heavily monitored and tended to. Medical staff have been instructed to wear hazmat suits, as we now believe the conditions to be contagious. Dr. Cruz's status remains unchanged. There has been no communication from those in charge of the disposal of Dr. Schwarzkopf's body. We are still desperately trying to reach them to get an update. Day 2. Time, 1:59 p.m. Data log 12. Every staff member tasked with the disposal of Dr. Schwarzkopf are dead. After forced entry into the isolation chamber due to the lack of communication, the security staff were greeted to a room full of bodies. Dr. Schwarzkopf's body was not among them. Only his body bag was found in the equipment closet, along with the ventilation screen wide open. The entire facility is now on emergency lockdown, and there is now a base-wide search to locate him. Dr. McCannis is completely catatonic and refuses to respond to any stimulus. He has literally sat as still as a statue for at least 16 hours. He was even threatened to be terminated if he did not talk. In response, he only turned and looked blankly at the scientist whom was speaking to him. At that moment, the scientist claimed she heard a voice in her head that told her, "We live forever." She left the room shaken and distraught and begged to be relieved of duty immediately. Dr. Cruz's status is unchanged. However, she is standing motionless in the corner of the room, staring at the large mirror on the wall. Her skin is snow white, wrinkled, and it appears her hair is falling out. I, along with most other non-essential staff, have been confined to our quarters until further notice. One of my colleagues told me that they are going to contact the Nexus liaison and have them send in the army for backup. Day 2. Time, 6:03 p.m. Data log 15. Our call for assistance has been unheeded. Our shortwave radios, as well as our hand-wired communication lines, have been inexplicably cut off. We brought this concern to our immediate supervisors, but they were also without resolve. God only knows how many of us are left alive, but it has become apparent that we are not meant to be rescued by our superiors. All 4 doctors have now been lost. No one knows their status. Last I was informed, only Dr. Smith was still accounted for. Last report from remaining security personnel was that she was practically glued to her room window. Every time someone would walk by and favor a glance at her demented, stoic-esque gaze, they would fall immediately into a state of nausea. Only a few of those mentioned have reported in. The rest are unaccounted for. As of now, no one here is safe. Nexus have completely turned a blatant, blind eye towards us. Project Wisteria was clearly nothing shy of a gamble of our lives to them for the sake of lining their fucking pockets. They are killing everyone. If anyone fucking hears this, please, for the love of whatever God you believe in, help us. There are a few remaining data logs that I came across, but I know there is no more time to write them down. The screaming and sounds of massacre and destruction have faded minutes ago. I'm positive I'm the only one left alive. But the lull and the madness does nothing to comfort me. The deafening silence only augments my anxiety. The cameras are down and the power has gone out hours ago. The backup generators won't last much longer. I know they will come for me next. I don't know when, but I'm certain they will. I lament at the thought of what unimaginable things they are now capable of, and what havoc they might bring upon the outside world. I am writing all this to hopefully give a fighting chance to those of you whom read it, to prepare yourselves for whatever is to come. Many endeavors of man into the unknown have gone awry, and I can promise the average person will only know of a fraction of these attempts. Humanity's exponential advancements in technology, presumed understanding of the universe, and ravenous hunger for progress over time have no doubt brought the greatest discoveries of mankind. I fear, however, that this same blind, relentless ambition for progress may now be our undoing. There are reasons we have only evolved to experience the level of reality we need to survive. There are reasons our senses which allow us to perceive the world around us are limited to what they are. There are reasons that our species is isolated to our comfortable little plane of existence, separated and are numb to whatever lies beyond our perception. But here, in this place, we work tirelessly to challenge our isolation and pierce that ominous veil. We succeeded, but not in a way which we could have ever been prepared for. We challenged the universe. We challenged creation. Now we get to pay the price for losing. They are screaming and banging on my door now, and will be on me in seconds. Before I put my pistol in my mouth and spare myself the fate of whatever those abominations have in store for me, I'll leave you all with one final request. Please, forgive us.